Hit it, Phil.
Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Can it be the breeze that fills the trees with rare and magic perfume? Oh, no, it isn't the breeze, it's Jackson time. La-da-da-da.
Stay tuned.
Right after this episode.
For our discussion.
I think the people that we follow mainly are people like Gandhi and Martin Luther King, and unfortunately they get killed. Now, we're the only people that have tried the same gig with humor, and I think the establishment or whoever it is that kill with these people don't know how to handle humor, and so I have just as much sense of humor as you, probably more.
I hope so. Jack, you're a laughter maker. Have you ever, say, cracked a gag with a view to not just making a laugh, but making a laugh plus with some political or moral purpose?
No, I don't get into the political field for laughter or ridiculing anybody in politics. I have some true stories that have happened with politicians that are funny and they're nice and they get laughs with. But I would like to ask Mr. Lemon, and I'm merely asking this.
Good on you, Jack.
I'm merely asking this because I just want to know. You know, I'm not trying to be facetious, and I mean, does this all stem from the war in Vietnam?
No. We're protesting. I mean, all forms of violence. I think the war in Vietnam is a manifestation of the whole of the world's violence. I think Hitler and the Germans were not the only ones to blame. I think it's a manifestation of man's violence. So, of course, I'm protesting against Vietnam, but also London or anywhere else the violence is happening.
Well, pardon. Go ahead, Josh. Well, what would you think then? Now, for instance, it's difficult for me to voice an opinion because I have no children that can be sent to war. I just lost a nephew just a few weeks ago who was only there 4 weeks and was killed in Vietnam. But I can't actually voice an opinion because if I had a child, it would be a little bit different. But what I'm trying to say is we don't want violence and we don't want wars. Now, whether it's necessary to have the war in Vietnam, I don't know, but it could be necessary for this reason. Supposing we all stepped out of there, America got out of there. Now they come down, the communists come down, and they take it over, which I'm afraid they eventually will anyway. Now, as long as they can take that over, they take the next country over, the next country over,
you were saying something
the next country over. Then in the future, which wouldn't be too long, England and America would be fighting the entire surrounding world, in which we could have really war and, well, the whole thing would be a holocaust. No. You don't think they would? Well, I'm just asking. I don't know whether they would or not, but it could.
I just don't believe that if the Americans pulled out of Vietnam, that the whole world would turn communist, as a result of that. I mean, oh, well, all right, but I can't answer that on that level, I just don't believe in violence. I'm sorry about it. Right, I don't think the communists that could take over the world. I think the fight in Vietnam is business.
We've got to leave it.
And it's not about
theory knows we're ending on, but it's a very important note. We really must leave it for another week, indeed for another. Leave after Jack Benny. That's it. Jack, how long I've been trying to get you on this show, and I thought we'd really never make it, especially when Bob Hope said that you wouldn't cross the Atlantic unless you were able to hitch a free lift.
Bob Hope, I'm supposed to be mean. Knew as a character. It's something I do to get laughed. Because I'm really not. Bob Hope, I think, although he's one of my closest friends, is really mean, because how else could you accumulate so much money? Now he has First, let me tell you something. He called me, you know, he has a golf tournament every year. And he has a ball in which he is the toastmaster, the master of ceremonies. And he had that eye trouble again. So he called me. We call each other when we need each other, you see. So he called me, and I was in Honolulu, and he asked me if I would take his place. And I said that I would, but I'd call him back and let him know if I could surely make it. So I called him back, and I called him collect.
Actually.
So when I got back, Bob said to me, Jack, why would you, of all people, call me? I know you're doing me a favor. Call me collect. I said, I'll tell you what, but why, Bob? I have been reading in magazines that you are worth, now you know Time Magazine claims that he is worth $500 million. And I said, anybody who is worth $740 more than I am has got to pay for this thing. Really? I figured it out to the penny.
$740. There's a bit more today. Did you see these pictures this morning in the papers of Jack busking on the embankment with a violin? And then you're not supposed to mean, yeah.
I told somebody I was husking all day. I didn't know what that... busking.
Yeah. How did you do?
Well, you know, these are supposed to be gag pictures, see? But I made 12 pounds while I was out. I didn't want it to be a total loss, you know.
Jack, apart from doing these things, and we've seen you're always a welcome visitor to these shores, but do you yourself recall your first, I mean, apart from us seeing you on screen, your first appearance before an English audience?
Well, that would be the first time that I ever played the Palladium Theater. Now, you know, I used to play there often. Lately, I'd come every other year. And the first time I played the Palladium was about between 35 and 40 years ago. And Val Parnell ran it then, you see. And he asked me if I would be the toast match. I believe they called it, what do they call it? Compere, something. Or bilingual. So I said, all right, that I would try it. But I was worried because I didn't know if the same kind of jokes would go over here as they did in New York or in America. So I was having lunch with Val Parnell, and a famous critic, I believe passed away, Hannah Swapper, came in, who could be very sarcastic. And Val Parnell asked him, he said to him, you know, Jack Benny, I want to play the Palladium, but he afraid that his material won't go over here the way it does at the Palace in New York. The Swaffer just looked at me, you see, and he turned to Parnell. He says, well, Jack Benny intends to do his act in English, doesn't he? And Alpha Yak, he said, well, he might be surprised the way we picked it up over here. Then he came to see the show, you see, and in those days, a comedian didn't dress in a business suit. That is in England. Everybody looked like Max Miller, you see. And I was dressed in a nice business suit, and I was a compere, and it took me quite a while to get the audience going. And that night, the next morning in the paper, again, Swaffer reviewed the show, and he said, then out walked Jack Benny looking like a Harley Street physician, you see. Now, this worried me a little bit because in Los Angeles, we have a Harley Street that we don't think very much of.
What was this one of the trip you made with George Burns and Gray Fiala?
No, we went afterwards, the George Burns and Gray. But that's a long story with the George Burns game.
Come on.
Huh?
What happened? That was quite a hilarious trip, wasn't it?
Well, he's crazy. I think a lot of people probably know here that he's the fella that that not only makes me laugh a lot, but insults me at times. He's my closest friend who has always been selling it. Well, anyway, we were here, we were playing, both of us were playing at the Palladium. And then we went to Paris, and this is a very long, uninteresting story. You want to hear? Anyway, we went to Paris, and then we decided we'd go to the south of France. Now, you have to know George Burns to know what a sense of humor he had. And so I said, I think I've got a great way of going. Let's not fly, but I hear there's a blue train that's just marvelous that goes from Paris to Cannes. Let's take it. So I thought that I bought 2 drawing rooms, one for George and Gracie, and one for myself and my wife, Mary. But when we got on the train with all our luggage, we found out that they were 2 very close together like this. You see, we had to sit like this with the luggage here, and I said, I can't figure this out, and I called the porter over. I said, I asked for 2 drawing rooms. They said, no, this is for 1. I said, but I paid for 2. He said, I'm sorry, but whatever it is, as a Frenchman. And finally, I gave him a tip to try to get me. And he didn't do it. I kept tipping him, and he couldn't find one. So, well, we sat there like this all the time on the train with our knees practically touching each other and the baggage here. And finally, we couldn't stand it any longer. It was a miserable trip. He said, well, let's go in and have dinner. So we go in to have dinner. Then I realized that I forgot you're supposed to buy tickets to have dinner, which I also forgot. So now we couldn't be served till the 3rd serving was 11 o'clock at night. So again, the 4 of us go back, and again, we're sitting like this. We're looking out of the window. Now it's dark. It's a lousy trip, you see? And we're looking like this in the dark. Now we had to wait till 11 o'clock, and we went in and had dinner, and there was nothing left to eat. We had a little wine and cheese. Now we go back and we want to go to bed. So in order to get undressed to go to bed, it was like a Marx Brother picture, you see. In order to go to bed, for George to get his up, or Gracie had to come in our room, then I'd have to go in their room while Mary got undressed. Finally, we all get undressed, this miserable fit. And Mary's in our lower, Gracie is there, George is up there, and I'm up here. We're just about to go to sleep, and Mary, my wife, says, I'm going to take a sleeping pill. And she said to me, do you want a sleeping pill, Jack? I said, yes, I certainly do. Says, Gracie, you want a sleeping pill? Says, yes. Says, George, you want a sleeping pill? He says, not me. I wouldn't miss this trip for the world.
Bring on a fair of newlyweds recently returned from what must be the most publicized honeymoon in history. Up and about and out of the bag, let's welcome Mr. and Mrs. Lennon, John and Yoko.
I'm going to shake down to the game.
Where are you? No idea. Not you.
F it. Watch the mics. Well, if you sit yourself down, and I'm sorry, John, we only got a couch tonight.
It's okay. Let up a bed.
In fact, I believe that after your 7 days in bed there, you felt so tired you wanted to come home and go to bed.
So we talked to the press from 10 in the morning till 10 at night to try and get peace through their heads, and so we didn't have much rest, really.
Well, now let me ask you what you've been asked since you came back, Johnny. What were you after? What is this all about? What are you trying to achieve by doing these extraordinary, bizarre things, you and Yoko?
Well, everything we do is aimed at peace, and we spend 7 days trying to communicate through the communication media, that's the press and TV, and to try and tell people who are interested in protesting to do something about it instead of sitting at home talking about it. And for the ones that are doing it in the streets, the only result is front page Mirror of policemen getting kicked and or students getting kicked. And there's many ways of protesting. One is you can grow your hair. For us, this is the most functional and suitable way of protesting for the people we are. Now, any ordinary person can give up 1 week of their holiday, which is what we did. It wasn't a fact of anybody, only you can afford to stay in the Hilton.
We
can do it anywhere.
John, doing it with this objective. What does it do for you? What does it do for Yoko? What would you?
Well, to us, it was an event, or a happening that people know them better as. And it was just like a stage show,
Well, we felt very good because we got a very good response from people, and we knew that we weren't just us two. There are many people in the world who feel the same way as we got.
We got many letters and things like that from people.
You said to me the other evening when you came back from Amsterdam, John, that you didn't really care, or worse, this about whether people thought you were nuts or not, if you got them thinking.
Yeah, we're willing to be the world freaks, The world's like a party that's a bit depressing and a bit heavy, and that everybody's too serious.
But do you feel that the thoughts you got them thinking now have been helpful thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there's the old woman that wrote to one of the dailies saying she was the best laugh she had in her life, Well, that was enough for me. She's 73 or something.
Well, let me ask the audience here now. This was your objective. May I ask you, may I get a camera on the audience? Are there any of you here, and please don't be afraid to put your hand up, who have thought more about peace because of any of the things that John and Yoko have done? Anyway,
Thank you.
somebody there has put their hand. Somebody here in the front row. Can we get a microphone, say, here? Can we get a microphone? The front row here, for instance, or somebody who's putting up the hand. I wanted to see what, thank you. Sorry. Can you tell me how this made you think more about peace, sir?
Well, I thought it was the biggest piece of rubbish that I've heard for many, many years. I do, Andrew, if I can add to this, that when reading the story of them both being in this bag, I did actually wonder as to whether they were refugees from the Lambeth Dustman strike.
Yeah.
Did you have a laugh?
Did I have a laugh? I think the example you set to some of the children and youngsters was nothing to laugh at.
What do you think was wrong with two people staying in bed?
The fact that you staying in bed was nothing wrong with that. In fact, as you stayed there longer, I think it would be better for everybody.
Okay, don't get him sober. But just look in the mirror before you get insulted. Now, what offended you about what we do?
Well, I'm sure I don't mind looking in the mirror. I think I see something better than looking at you.
Well, that's a matter of personal taste now. What offended you, basically? Can you really tell me what bugs you?
Well, not just the one item alone, your general attitude to the youngsters, your general attitude to the youngsters in this country, of the way you lead them or attempt to lead them and try to make out that you're not doing anything about it. One minute you tell us that you're trying to create peace in this world and everybody should be happy and joking, and the next minute you're telling us it's nothing. Whether these youngsters take cannibals or anything like this is all nothing. This part of the story doesn't count. You want to tell us all about this peace you want to do. What about some of the other things you're doing?
Well, have you done anything for peace? I mean, particularly, do you think that you've done something for peace?
Yes, I think I have.
What have you done?
Well, during the last war, there were many of us, wasn't there?
No.
Many of us during the last war that spent our times trying to get peace.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, who told you to go? Did you go your own volition? Did you volunteer? Did you volunteer?
Did I volunteer? Yes, I did.
Oh, well, congratulations. What are you doing now?
Making money out there.
Who was the other person who put up the hand? Were you being serious?
I wouldn't get it with this argument for $1 million.
That there was somebody there, someone else put up the hand. What?
It was beautiful. The icon now, isn't it?
Thank you.
And you felt it was beautiful? And did it make you think about, a lot of people did agree with you, did it make you think that you could do something about peace in the world as a result?
Join the army,
Why?
John, somebody right behind you that wants to say something.
The icon is a symbol.
Very beautiful. Yeah.
What's beautiful about icons?
It's a symbol of growth. And if you plant acorns, the tree will grow. If you bomb it, it won't.
No, a bit enough.
Can't you see anything beautiful in acorns?
Oh, yeah.
You like trees?
Everybody likes trees.
Well, what do you think we come from? Jam jars. That's the bumble. What, gee, Johnny?
All right, let me come back there on here.
It's getting me going.
No. Well, no, I mean, no, we're trying to get a view there.
Yes.
And here's John, the Beatle of 5 years ago. What do you think John of 5 years ago would think of John Lennon now? Is 69?
What was
Seriously now?
69. Fit man.
No, I mean 5 years ago of now. I mean the
I
John.
can't imagine it. I mean, I thought pretty much the same then. Only I was younger, I thought.
Yeah. So your thoughts, you feel, haven't changed. It's just that you've had a chance of expressing them. Is that it?
Yes, and I'm less. I'm more myself maybe than I was 5 years ago. If that was before Hard Day's Night, I was me. After that, I was some kind of Beatle,
Yeah. What? Rob. Yeah.
Do you feel that enough people are getting something serious out of what you're doing, or are they reacting to it like, as gentlemen here, it's just another stunt? What kind of an idiot is it?
Well, you get both, you get both, and you get the majority of people that we can't attempt to communicate with people like him because it doesn't work, But we got through to a lot of people, really. And even if we get you through to 5 out of this lot, that's enough, It's better than not getting through to that 5.
I mean, why do you think, now this man in the front row is quite vehement, why do you think so many people seem to have turned against the Beatles? There's an article which is very favourable, you may have read it tonight. Why have we turned against the Beatles? And about you, Yoko, why do you think people
Because we and the public and the press, we do it is create an image of people, or the Beatles or anybody else, and then when you don't conform to the image, they get upset, as if we belong to them in that respect, and we don't.
Yeah.
And I don't intend to go around my life looking like Help or Hard Day's Night to suit other people's view of me. I'm changing all the time.
Yehudi?
May I ask a question? Is there anything of your own choice that you would be willing to die for?
I don't know, probably. Batista.
You would?
I don't think I'm in a good enough state of consciousness to sacrifice my life like Christ did.
But like the other gentleman who did
I wouldn't go in the army for peace. I wouldn't kill somebody else for peace. I'd give my own life for it if I was good enough. I don't think I'm into that.
You're assuming that everybody is fighting for an equally useless cause. That sometimes it's necessary to fight and to fight other
Well, that's
human
your
beings.
opinion, no.
Yeah.
Christ didn't say anything about fighting, did he? Or do you believe in Christ?
He certainly was faced with some...
Well, do you believe in what he said, or don't you?
I believe in what he said.
Did he say anything about fighting? And all he said was turn the other cheek? I love thy enemy. He didn't say anything about...
He didn't either say necessary to stay in bed, did he, as you did?
If you're going to be... as soon as we get to a point where you can't answer, you have to be so satirical about it. Well, there's nothing to say about that. I don't believe in killing people.
I don't believe in taking oneself so seriously under
I'm not serious, or I wouldn't be in bed doing an event like that, would I?
Thank you. There is the shade of contradiction. I mean, when you say take himself, he's obviously very serious about the peace thing, but at the same time he's saying if he can get someone to laugh at him, he's not objecting to that.
I think the people that we follow mainly are people like Gandhi and Martin Luther King, and unfortunately they get killed. Now we're the only people that have tried the same gig with humor, and I think the establishment or whoever it is that kills these people don't know how to handle humor, and so I have just as much sense of humor as you, probably more.
I hope so.
Jack, you're a laughter maker. Have you ever, say, cracked a gag with a view to not just making a laugh, but making a laugh plus with some political or moral purpose?
No, I don't get into the political field for laughter or ridiculing anybody in politics. I have some true stories that have happened with politicians that are funny and they're nice and they get laughs with. But I would like to ask Mr. Lemon, and I'm merely asking this. Good on you, Jack. I'm merely asking this because I just want to know. I'm not trying to be facetious, and I I mean, does this all stem from the war in Vietnam?
No. We're
doesn't.
protesting.
I mean,
all
it's-
forms of violence. I think the war in Vietnam is a manifestation of the whole of the world's violence. I think Hitler and the Germans were not the only ones to blame. I think it's a manifestation of man's violence. So of course I'm protesting against Vietnam, but also London or anywhere else the violence is happening.
Well, what? Oh, pardon me. Go ahead, Joe. Well, what would you think then? Now, for instance, it's difficult for me to voice an opinion because I have no children that can be sent to war. I just lost a nephew just a few weeks ago who was only there 4 weeks and was killed in Vietnam. But I can't actually voice an opinion because if I had a child, it'd be a little bit different. But what I'm trying to say is we don't want violence and we don't want wars. Now, whether it's necessary to have the war in Vietnam, I don't know, but it could be necessary for this reason. Supposing we all stepped out of there, America got out of there. Now they come down, the communists come down, and they take it over, which I'm afraid they eventually will anyway. Now, as long as they can take that over, they take the next country over, the next country over,
you were saying
the
something
next country over. Then in the future, which wouldn't be too long, England and America would be fighting the entire surrounding world, in which we could have really war and, well, the whole thing would be a horrible. You don't think they would? Well, I'm just asking. I don't know whether they would or not, but it could.
I just don't believe that if the Americans pulled out of Vietnam, that the whole world would turn communist, as a result of that. I mean, oh, well, all right, but I can't answer that on that level, I just don't believe in violence. I'm sorry about it.
All right, we're gonna deal. Sorry,
But I don't think the communists could take over the world. I think the fight in Vietnam is business.
We've got to leave it.
And it's not about
zero
communism
note we're
or
ending
anything,
on, but
it's
it's a very important note. We really must leave it for another week, indeed, for another.
Well, Jello again. This is Buck Benny speaking. We have a special presentation for you today, but let's go around and say who's all here so that we know. We've got Kathy Fuller-Seeley here. Kathy. We have John Henderson here. Hey, John.
Hello.
And we have Zach Eastman here. And we are here to present just a clip that I've always dreamed of finding something like this. A lot of us are Beatles fans and we're Jack Benny fans. And whenever those two worlds collide, it's a great thing, and they don't collide an awful lot. But this is the biggest collision ever of those two worlds. We have the a interview with the first interviews with Jack, and it's from this is all from 1969 is this show. And the second interview, then the second guest on that show was John Lennon. And the whole time I'm listening to this, I'm going, please stay, Jack. Please don't get up and leave. Don't get up and leave. Don't get up and leave. And he stays, and they say a little something, and then it goes on, and eventually Jack asks questions of John, and it's the very, very end. It's the last 3 minutes of this thing. And they have a wonderful dialogue back and forth. Just because I know that's what people are going to want to hear, I'm going to take and clip that, leave it where it is, of course, so you can listen to the whole thing and find it. But I'm also going to bring it to the front, because all that happens with this is it sort of starts like right away with a question to there's no really introduction or anything. It's just all of a sudden Jack starts talking. Start with the interview with Jack. So since it doesn't really have a beginning anyway, might as well just drop that piece at the beginning and have that 3-minute dialogue piece with John Lennon and Jack Benny going back and forth, and then we'll get to the rest of it. Anyway, Kathy, why don't you tell us who this is doing the interview, what show this is from, and maybe you can tell us the date too and stuff. So.
Well, sure. There was so far not a lot of information about this show by 1969. So much of television is, unlike when I can find things about the early 50s, is just sort of considered every day. But this was the Eamonn Andrews show. on, I think, ITV, not the BBC, but on one of the commercial networks in Great Britain. He was an Irish interviewer, a kind of Irish David Frost, who some critics claimed that he wasn't good at heavy questions and he preferred to interview celebrities more than politicians or other kind of newsmakers. And the date of this episode, for which we only have the audio track, is April 3rd, 1969. And I believe that John Lennon and Yoko Ono had just done one of their bed-ins, and yet they had not yet gone to Montreal to do the second bed-in. But that's the main focus of the show. After Jack was in London to perhaps do a play at the Palladium, do some small things. So, and that's the context of the show.
Yeah, which is fantastic. And thank you so much, Kathy, on that. And Kathy, what were your general thoughts on this thing? What stood out to you?
Well, it's a good old, the heyday of talk shows. And now that we have podcasts and things, they're back. I found it a fascinating sort of collision of parts of popular culture. That ridiculous song about apples and peaches and pears.
Yeah.
So bright and early 60s poppy in the middle of it. I was really interested that in the brief interview that Jack chooses to talk about Bob Hope and pulls in a line about him being mean. Well, now that to me seems that Jack knows he's speaking to a British audience, because in America you say cheap. But in Britain, you characterize someone who is penurious as being mean. And so he's trying a few small jokes about Bob Hope being mean. But talking to a British audience here where he's meaning cheap. So,
I thought that's interesting. I noticed the same thing. I was like, he's talking about him being mean, but he's the references he's making is to him being cheap. And I'm like, what was going on there? So I did not know that.
And one other factoid, that in the bit of research I was able to find very few mentions, for all that we think this is a fascinating show. It didn't get a lot of press, but one thing I understand, Andrews actually got into a bag with John and Yoko.
Mm-hmm.
So doing one of their bag-ins. So he was willing to, which shows that, he's Andrews is really trying to be a sort of neutral observer, or leaning into and giving John and Yoko their say. But it was also interesting that he opened the discussion up to members of the studio audience, who to get this really sharp kind of dialogue going on. And
Yoko doesn't say much in this, which I'm sure a lot of fans will be happy about. And also, she doesn't seem to be mic'd up very well for a lot of it. She sort of is, you hear her, but barely off in the distance sort of thing. So, John, what are your thoughts?
I forgot Yoko was there. I thought it was great. John Lennon used to be a part of a band called the Beatles, and I'm a big Beatles fan, and I'm a big Jack Benny fan. So like you say, worlds colliding. It's really cool to as the host of a Jack Benny podcast, then to be able to include my Beatles fandom and talk about that. Yeah. And so I thought that Jack Benny's portion was a little bit weak, especially considering all of the great stuff we know from Jack Benny. It seems like it was just sort of an off the cuff interview, and he wasn't really prepared with bits and jokes and things. Mm-hmm. He was a little reluctant to tell his George Burns story about coming to England, and I can see why he was reluctant. It wasn't his greatest story,
right?
But so then they get.
I would agree. Some of it, though, the plus side is there's some new things I hadn't heard Jack share before, so that was nice. But like you say, they're not the most exciting stories, not the best, and the John part becomes the main part of this for somebody who's being a fan of both. I would say the John part is the most interesting.
Definitely.
The very most interesting is Jack and John relating to each other, not just because I'm a Benny fan, but he asks the best questions of anybody the whole time. I mean, everybody else is essentially judging John. It's all about how stupid John is for doing this, and why would you do this, and why would you waste everybody's time, and why do you do bet-ins and bag things and all that? And obviously the answer is because I'm trying to draw attention to something. If I just tell you in an interview, it gets covered by three things. If I tell you in a bag, or if I tell you in a bet-in, it's covered by the world media. I become the talk of everything, and this whole talk of Vietnam in 1969 becomes on everybody's lips, and everybody's talking about it. Whereas if I didn't, I mean, this 69, people were having issues with Vietnam and things, but they really didn't reach a crescendo until 71, 72, where people like, get him out of there sort of thing. But anyway, over to Zach. What are your thoughts on this one?
Well, I do agree with John that Jack's interview is underwhelming. Yeah. It almost feels like, without having heard the exact story verbatim, we've heard these kind of stories verbatim. So he's got some kind of prep material, which is fine. You know, I've watched the David Frost interview, so I know like more or less what I would be getting out of him in an international spectrum. But first of all, I have to stress this. I love the Beatles, but my Beatles fandom didn't skyrocket the way my Benny fandom did. So my impression of Lennon at this point was not like decloaked or anything. I just got it clarified for me. When he's speaking about like an end to violence, period, that's a different statement than protesting Vietnam, even though they get conflated. And the first instinct of something that was actually odd was not what people were reacting to or even asking questions of. It almost felt like it was front loaded by people who wanted to berate John, which I thought was sad to hear. Like, yeah, you're literally hearing very, very narrow-minded people bashing a lovely man. But
it's very much a generational thing. These are people, the older members of the audience who lived through World War II. Their idea of the good war, of course you must sacrifice and you must do those things. So it's both a political spectrum as well as a generational thing.
That's interesting. Yeah,
right.
I don't think that was the plan from the show. I don't think this guy planted that. It seemed like he wanted somebody who was pro John Lennon, and the first guy who comes up is anti John Lennon, and he creates this big crazy.
I wouldn't suggest that the host did that. It just almost felt like people actively might have known that John Lennon was going to be there, and they decided, we're going to be a part of this audience, we're going to speak up and say something. Or it's just happenstance.
That's why you have screeners to screen people before you put them on the microphone, but they didn't apparently have that.
That's entirely possible. But I will say, like, you're right, Kathy, it is generational. What's even more interesting on that front is that the generational aspect, where you think Jack might be loud, it actually affirms something that we know has been said about Jack, which is political arena naivete, because he literally says a line that in thinking about it over the course of the last couple of hours, I'm like, that is very funny and very timely for him to do, which is, I wouldn't get into this argument for $1 million.
Yes.
But then comes this. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Please, but I'll argue against naivete, but you tell me your version. So.
I think it's naivete on the surface. I do think that if he has opinions, he knows that he's not going to isolate his audience. This is a guy who didn't want to tell a Nixon joke in the middle of Watergate, but would tell one. And that's, so I think that, like, he exudes naivete, but he's intelligent enough to know what's going to isolate his audience and where he wants to not draw a line, or where he wants to draw a line.
I would suggest it's more carefully plotted naivete, and in not naivete, but a kind question. Tell me where you're coming from. Because if you think back in Hollywood, all of Jack and Mary's friends are among the most conservative people out there.
Yeah, Barbara. Yeah.
Who from 63 would have been, oh, all the young people are wrong. Oh, this war is righteous. So he knows, he's been hearing it. And as I said, I gave him a bunch of credit for being kind enough to say, Mr. Lemon, even if he's,
yeah.
Please tell me why. Please tell me. I'm hearing from officials in the U.S. that about the domino theory. That was U.S. policy at the time, and so he's not yelling, and he's just trying to be reasonable. But as you say, it also, I think, very cleverly comes out as naivete, as in, I'm not Bob Hope. I'm
right.
say
That's a white elephant in the room to kind of talk about, because unlike Jack, Bob Hope had no compuncture about telling the hippies how he felt about them. Right. And so within that respect, you're right, Kathy, he is very kind when he asks the question. He's so kind. And
Carson would not have done that way. Neither would have Hope. There's so few. And when he poses that question the way he does, before that I said I was praying that please say something to him, please have an interaction. Then as I'm listening to John Lennon's interview and hearing how people are bashing him, I'm like, please, Jack, don't just bash him. Don't be like one of these folks, and be more nuanced. And he was, and it just was such a reward. It was like, yes, I may not agree with your questioning, or I agree with Zach about the naivete about the question of, well, if we just get out of there, won't they take over the whole world, sort of thing. I mean, that all is questionable, but it was at least a question that was asking John something. Unfortunately, John didn't pick up on the ultimate comeback, which would have been, Mr. Lemon, I have a question for you, and him to say, what is it, Mr. Bemmy? But he didn't do that. So unfortunately, he missed that opportunity.
Right.
Well, Buck, tell us your take on the Lemon thing.
What's my take on it?
Yeah.
I think it was an accident. I don't think, to me,
agree.
It didn't sound like Jack doing something. And when the audience gave their reaction, it sounded like he was a little surprised.
Yeah.
I don't think he realized that he got his name wrong.
And it's not his style.
No, it wouldn't at all. That would be a Bob Hope thing to do or something, but it's not a Jack Benny thing. And so anybody that's a fan of Jack is going, oh, he just mispronounced his name is all he did.
Yeah.
And what's cool is I don't think anyone recognized. I think everybody thought it was a joke, so that he's all good on you, somebody says, and so forth.
The host
but I think John realized it was a mistake, and so John didn't even say anything about it and just moved on with.
But he would have done it regardless, because you see the people just attacking him, and again, he just sits back and says like, "Well, did you have a laugh or whatever?"
That might actually that double affirms Kathy's assertion on no naivete, because I would look at this as both a joke and a diffusion, because it sounds like Jack recognizes that this is becoming unstable and caustic, and so he's diffusing, right?
And yet, this is a man we know can't belch, ad-lib a belch after a Hungarian dinner. So to be put on the spot like this in a public place that's recorded, to have this happy little talk show be going off the rails, and for him to, instead of just, we know him of just, not being able to say some things, but we know when his emotions got going in the way he could ad-lib to criticize his performers when they made a mistake on the show, the fact that he can jump in, but
there's
middle of the road.
There's a humanism about that, and that speaks to the humanist in Jack, which I think, if the circumstance were allowed to extend itself into this interview beyond that 2 minutes you hear, you might actually hear a very humane discussion, or like something that was a little bit more middle grounded between these two cross-generational icons of different spectrums. And there's something that I thought, I could be very wrong, but because I would trust you guys on this over me, because I have yet to hear everything in Buck's archives, let alone all the other archives. Has Jack talked about his extended family beyond just Joan in any interview? Because he mentions a nephew getting killed in Vietnam.
Right.
I did not know that at all.
Right.
Yeah,
That was new
right.
information to me.
How in the world is this like it's I think it's strange, but you'd think that the Vietnam question would be the big revelation. It's not for me. It's that Florence had a son, or
no. It's the extended cousins back in Waukegan. It's it's the his because he's got cousins, mothers, sisters, and brothers, and things like that. So it's not Florence's children. It's extended. It's more like second cousin.
So like a second, third nephew, something like that. Yeah. Well, even regardless, that's still like that's a part of his family that he never talks about. No. And it's so strange to hear that, and yet hearing it in the context of this interview, it's like
it gave weight to his question. It gave weight to everything he was doing. It was like,
because like, let's face it, like if you look at the history of the conflict, because he's narrowing in on Vietnam, Lennon's going for the big world picture, and in a sense, the takeaway that I got, which I wasn't expecting to have, was, oh my gosh, John Lennon didn't know how to answer his question. That's what I got out of that. But I have to keep in mind that Lennon's going for a wider view. He's not narrowing in on Vietnam. He's talking about violence all across the globe, Vietnam included. So it's
I think John would have been able to answer his question in a harsh way, but I think the fact that it was a question that was a thoughtful question that was given to him, the only thoughtful question in this whole thing he's ever had, he didn't want to come and crush Jack, so he's like trying to do it in a polite way, which is great for John to do that. Now, the other piece I want to mention with this is the most exciting piece of this whole thing is that last 3 minutes with Jack. And then they run out of show and the guy says, oh, it's too bad we have to end in the middle of this or whatever, but it's time to go, sort of thing. And so often you find these archive treasure troves like this, and it's so awesome finding it. But the other part of it is usually frustration in that you're going, oh, they would have done it just a little bit differently. Like if they would have had this, if Lennon would have been the first guest, or if they would have had Lennon and John together, had Jack and John together at the beginning, and they would have got into this dialogue. I think that's a conversation between Jack and John that could have gone on for 15 minutes or something instead of the 3. Because I think they were just going to start to get some back and forth going, but then it just sort of had to end.
Right. Well, that would be Dick Cavett or David Frost, and this guy puts in the pop singer going apples, peaches, pears,
Yeah. And like, if you look at the fact that there is this generational thing where a lot of people maybe are there to see Jack Benny and not John Lennon, and when we look at it, we'd like, oh, I'd like more of that from our perspective. But when you're, an older person, middle-aged person in 1969, you want to hear from Jack Benny. You don't want this other guy, this hippie, taking over the whole conversation.
Right.
I also wonder if Jack Benny is more willing to be vulnerable, like mentioning that and engaging in this conversation that's even hinting on political, because he's on foreign television rather than American television.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly what that is. And I know that this isn't the BBC, but anytime I think of British television, I think, thank God something exists, because it seems like they were just dumping those tapes in the river, quote unquote, because like BBC stuff, like Doctor Who fans out there know the struggles on that. Monty Python is thankfully alive and well because somebody had the foresight to keep that stuff. But it's remarkable that we even have the audio. And I know it's like, we wish we could have more, but it's like, I think even in that 2 minutes, regardless of how much is said, you still get a lot of volume spoke about character from both ends of the spectrum. And like, at the end of the day, it's nice to hear, even as we're talking lately about like, getting to know more about Jack the human being and not the angelic savior. it's nice to have the comfort that if as imperfect as it might be, he has a thoughtful question from a humanist perspective to either, I mean, whether he's diffusing or genuinely curious. I think it's probably both, because this is a guy who can sense, quote unquote, someone bombing in the room. And when you look at, if you listen to it, Lennon's bombing in the room because the audience is not his. And so he's diffusing it in a very diplomatic way. And you're right. I feel like he doesn't ever feel open about talking about these issues unless he's outside of the country, because I mean, I don't like talking about it on my own show, and yet my show is based on that kind of stuff. So like I have to talk about that stuff, but it makes me uncomfortable too, because I wish we could all live in a world where everybody's happy. And so like it's like a really positive thing to take away from that interview, is like that is one part of Jack that will never be diffused, no matter how much more you learn about him. He is that humanist that whether
and this was the ultimate,
you know,
challenge to that, right?
Yeah.
This was where you're going, if Jack is ever going to attack someone or be inconsiderate, this is his opportunity, because the entire audience has been inconsiderate to John the entire time. He could easily, the audience would want him to jump on board and say, what an idiot you are, John Lennon, to be doing this whole bet-in thing and the bag thing, and you're just confusing everybody, and you're not really making a point anyway, and blah, 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 blah,
yeah.
blah. He didn't do any of that. He strictly was just questioning and showing him respect that no one else showed him, even though he was asking, he did challenge him in a question, but still it was a very respectful question, and I loved it.
The clip might have even gotten greater exposure if it was actually John Lennon and Bob Hope, and then you just heard a scuffle rather than actual. You literally hear jabs. Like seriously, like Bob's, and part of Bob's mentality is that the viewpoint of war that he saw was the one he's exposed to in World War II, what he witnesses on the ground there. So therefore, he is not going to waver against the troops. And the thought during Vietnam is, like, this is an unjust war, and people are attacking troops in the process of that. So Bob's going to stick up for troops, even if it means him shooting off his mouth about things he may certainly not understand, especially when you hear that Nixon tape.
Was Bob in any war? He wasn't, right? But no, he couldn't.
No,
he was too young to be in World War One. Because Jack, of course, has the experience from World War One.
I think that's the difference between an actual veteran.
Troops in World War II. So he's got so much background that he brings to this, that's why I would have loved a longer conversation between them, and for Jack to have shared more about his history, which he never does. But it would have been the perfect opportunity for him to do that. And
I think that can be chalked up to the difference between a veteran and an entertainer.
Yes.
And there is a difference, regardless of how much action Jack saw.
Right.
You have a discipline in the military, in the armed forces, that you don't get from entertainment. And Bob had his own different form of discipline training, but it's coming from an entirely different spectrum. And like it's strange to kind of consider that we even have this at all.
Right.
And I think it does.
And just got it, I think. I mean, I've known of it for like 2 weeks. So
yeah, I think it's kind of remarkable that these things are still being found. I think like my big takeaway is like, oh, there's still hope that other stuff's just gonna pop up. Like, I know we all hope that BBC documentary that Laura's talked about shows itself somewhere. Yeah. I am kind of like genuinely surprised that they are allowed to talk about it as long as they are, because it sounds like it could be a situation where on American television, they would have been cut off the air right quick to a commercial or something. Like somebody in that room would have switched the board. Right, And so like the fact that it doesn't get cut off is incredible. And I think that speaks volumes to American television versus European television. And also, like even if somebody listens to this and they don't agree with Jack's like posing the domino theory and all the elements that come with that, I always have to remember with Jack, if one of my friends was Richard Nixon and they were telling me about all these evil things that are going on in the world, I'd probably be inclined to believe him because he's the president of the United States. Now, I have the benefit of hindsight and the benefit of looking at history and then trying to determine what could be a problem. I don't know if Jack had that same ability at that time. Like there are parts of his memoir where he doesn't understand movements like the Black Panther movement. So it's I have to take his question and his posing of the domino theory with that in mind in order to understand where he's coming from.
Yep. And
I
John
do think
has
this episode does a good job in letting a person hear both sides and understand both sides of the issue. And I do think that Jack comes off really well as a human being. But again, I'm a little disappointed that he doesn't come off that well as a comedian, because I feel like there's a lot of people who would come and listen to this to hear John Lennon. And if he really just kicked it out of the park, you know, then maybe they might be more interested to find more Jack Benny stuff. But this, you're just like, oh, there's just some other guy on the episode also. Right. And it's interesting as a Beatles fan to hear some of the things that John Lennon said, like saying that Christ never said anything about violence. And it's interesting. He's obviously reading, you know, about Christ. And then you start to see both the bed-in and his stuff with Yoko and his reading about Christ come into the song, The Ballad of John and Yoko, where I always wondered where it's like, is he just being clever? Because it kind of sounds like, you know, saying, oh, Christ, and but then saying they're going to crucify me as a sort of a clever thing. And I think it is both. But it's interesting to you really get planted right in 1969 and see, oh, this is where John's head at, and that's why he wrote that song, The Ballad of John and Yoko. I also thought it was fascinating as a Beatles fan to hear him say, I was myself before Hard Day's Night.
Yes. Oh my God. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes. That's my favorite part of John's section.
I want to ask John a quick question about that. John, the Ballad of John and Yoko, does it come... I think it comes after this interview, correct? Or is it before? I'll have to look it up and see when it was.
It must.
The internet will solve that
because
for
they
us.
reference the bed-in. He says, talking in our bed for a week or whatever.
Right. So it would be after. Yeah. It'd have to be after this. So I wonder if some of this interview, some of this with the people bashing John the whole time, is part of what he wrote into that song. Because this could be a piece of, he gets bashed pretty good and pretty solidly throughout this thing until Jack kind of saves him in the last couple minutes with something polite. But other than that, it's all Lennon bashing throughout.
It's recorded on April 14th, 1969 and released on May 30th, 1969.
Wow, so right after
there
this.
You go, 2 weeks. That's great. Well, John was getting bashed in every media. I mean, tons of reporters interviewing them in the hotel suite. So he is getting this show is just a drop in the bucket of all the reaction he was getting. So
as Beatles fans and more experienced in it than I am, because like my education on it doesn't include the stopgaps like this. How do you feel about him proclaiming that statement of like, I was who I was before A Hard Day's Night, and I'm still like it. Him clearly drawing a line between Mop Top versus I and the other bandmates have ascended beyond this narrow way of thinking. Because I always, for some reason, my brain always goes to first they were doing this, and then they went into a mountain and had acid, and now suddenly they're experimenting. Clearly, it's not. But like, I wanted to know how you guys felt as Beatles fans hearing that definitive declaration of identity. Because I
100% agree with it as far as John goes, because I'm not sure about the other bandmates if they're all in that same boat. I think John was one of the older band members, and I think Ringo never really. He was the oldest band member. I mean, chronologically, age-wise, but he was not. Ringo never came across as the ultimate deep thinker of the group and things, but and I don't know with Paul. I think Paul, it was probably more of a maybe a morphing. I could see that him over time was getting deeper in his thoughts and things, perhaps, but he was into some of the avant-garde stuff and things early on, even before John in some ways. So
It's
so
almost
that
like
can
he's
sort of fall
evolving,
in.
but at a different focus.
Right. But with John was deep from the beginning. John had trouble with some of their songs from the beginning of them being too light and so forth, and wanting to always add a depth to them. That's what make these songs so timeless, is you have somebody in there that's pushing for deeper lyrics, even in the early songs, even in the songs that are light. There's always, if John has anything to do with it, there's always kind of an undercurrent of a darkness to them and so forth that add to that. But that doesn't get fully unleashed, like you say, until they have more and more are allowed to have more and more time to work on the albums, allowed more time for creativity,
Longer
and the
leash,
drug
quote
impact
unquote.
as well, like you're saying. All of that tied together allows John a freedom that he didn't have. Also, him not caring so much. At the beginning, it was like, well, we got to make a hit. And so it was like, the stuff you want to do isn't a hit, right? But then eventually they would go, okay, we're the biggest band on the planet, we can do whatever we want. And so then they start doing different things with Sergeant Pepper,
Right,
and so forth. But
And
anyway, John, but what are your thoughts?
Artistically, and when it comes to some of his vulnerability, I think some of that really only comes out after he meets Yoko, and even in his solo stuff with like Mother and all those songs. But I feel like he's not talking about, because, you know, when we think about the Beatles, we think of, oh, here's the early Beatles and it's fun and it's light, it's happy, and here's the late Beatles and it's, you know, all this artistic, you know, amazing stuff. But when I think for John Lennon, the thing that he's referring to is not this big artistic transition, but when it's talking about his fame. So before Hard Day's Night, he was, you know, just a regular guy having a band, having fun. And then when Hard Day's Night hits, they're the Beatles. And their life is consumed by such an enormous amount of fame, you're not even a human being anymore.
Right. Yeah. Good point.
right. Yeah.
And Kathy, what are your thoughts on that? Because I haven't heard.
I totally agree with John. I think he's saying, you know, in another statement that's on Anthology 1, he says, we were just a band who managed to make it tremendously big. And in his high school and college art college days, you know, hanging out with the Exies, the existentialists that they met in Hamburg. So he's always had an inquisitive mind and always had opinions and wanted to be philosophical and political and things like that. And yet what the world knows, just as you said, Daryl, is the sudden creation of these cartoonish mop tops. And so when critics of the late 60s are going, how can you cartoonish mop tops have any opinions? I think John is going, I've been a human being this whole time. You don't know about me. So
yeah, it's I looked at it from the perspective of a movie like A Hard Day's Night coming out, or even the way like I Want to Hold Your Hand parodies that later on down the line as a film, and comparing it to that other end of the spectrum and just going like, it's so interesting to watch pop culture try to keep up with these guys as they are evolving, because so much happens in such a short span of time.
It's
conceivably
crazy how it's like a few years.
so
yeah, it's like A Hard Day's Night is barely even like fresh off the boat as a hit, and then all of a sudden you've got this evolution that was going to happen whether or not the public wanted to or the American people wanted it to.
Oh yeah, they weren't ready for that ride. They were the public wanted them to stay mop tops for another decade.
And if you think other bands didn't, you know, evolve, you know, where is the Dave Clark Five? Where are you know, where are the Beach Boys? You know, I mean, they got mad when so.
That's a question. That's a question I didn't expect to hear today. What happened to the Dave Clark Five? I was like, I didn't really care. But
that's a whole follow-up podcast that we'll have to do.
Jerry and the Pacemakers.
Yes.
What happened?
Yeah. Well, I think we'll leave it there and just let folks enjoy this great thing. what a great find, and what a delightful piece to add to Benny lore and Benny history, and Lennon history too, or Lemon history, depending on how you want to look at it. But the but I would say it just, I love the fact that we find things like this, and yet as we dig things through, you're always expecting we're going to find something that shows a chink in the Benny armor of his way of thinking, that he shows us he really wasn't that guy. Nobody could be that guy. That he's so perfect, and he's so in our minds. He's funny. He's got talent. He's kind. He's all of these things, and this just underscores that even more. And he's in a situation where it's easy for him not to be that, and yet he chooses to still be that and give Mr. Lemon dignity in this. So anyway,
this is a whole interview designed to extrapolate identities, like from both angles.
Yeah,
that's what's kind of remarkable about it existing. Period, is that somehow it has its own arc. Which is
what's
interesting.
funny is the actual show and the person on the show doing the interviews. That is not his goal. That is not. He wants to do this light piece of entertainment, and yet he has these two legendary figures that refuse to make that be what it is. I mean, Jack would have, I think, in his and did in his bit, but once Lennon starts coming into it, Jack can't just let that stand, and the way people are treating him, this man, and wants to give him some honor, some dignity. What a great piece. So anyway, folks, you got a lot to look forward to. This is a wonderful little piece of history, and we'll see you folks next time.